Support for Veterans Corner Radio is made possible by M&M Printing and the Observer News of Ruskin, Florida.
Hello and welcome to Veterans Corner Radio Podcast, information for and about veterans. For this edition of the podcast, host Joe Mulberger welcomes in retired Master Chief Petty Officer James Taylor. CPO Taylor discusses his service on submarines and provides us insight on how that impacted his family as well as his life on board. While on board, Jim served as the additional duty chaplain. This turned into his quest throughout the continuation of his life. Today, he holds a doctorate degree in ministry, is a published author, and ministers to veterans. Here now is Joe Mulberger with Veterans Corner Radio on Veterans Corner Radio Podcasts.
Welcome to Veterans Corner Radio, a show dedicated to providing information to all those who have served our country's military and to their families. Now, here is your host, combat veteran and educator, retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Joe Mulberger.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's show. You're tuned in to Veterans Corner Radio. Today we have none other than retired United States Navy Master Chief Petty Officer Jim Taylor. Sir, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about where you were born and when you were born.
Well, first, thank you so much for this opportunity, Joe. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I look forward to our time together. Mary and I were born in Baker, Louisiana, which is just north a little bit of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which you may be more familiar with. We were high school sweethearts, and we've been married 53 years, and we're still sweethearts today.
Wow. All right. Well, before we get into all of this, how you got into the Navy and all that stuff, that's a long time. When did you first meet your wife?
Between the sophomore and junior year of high school.
Wow. All right. So how did you meet?
Well, I had gotten brave enough to ask her out. She was a cheerleader and I was the center on the football team. So I wasn't, the bright sounding star. I was just kind of in the middle there, keeping kind of like Master Chiefs do, being down in the middle. And so I asked her out. She said yes. I didn't know that she was excited about that because she had been wondering if I would ever ask her out, but I had no clue. But that night we ever played a football game and a young kid stuck his elbow through my face mask and broke my nose. So I was late picking her up. But that night I went through the front door. I didn't say hi to her or anything when she opened the door. I went around to the couch where her dad was sitting, stuck out my hand and said, "Hello, Mr. Blackburn. My name's Jim Taylor." And the next day they told her, "That's the man you need to marry."
Oh, my gosh. Wow. Way to make the...
So, yeah, I did a good thing that day. I'll tell you about some bad things I did other than some negative.
Well, they say you never get a second chance at a first impression, but it sounds like you want to introduce us to the darker shade of Jim Taylor.
So, yeah, later on when we kind of like part of what, how I got into the Navy was I was in school for pharmacy, but I decided when I actually got the prerequisites done and decided to go into pharmacy school, I decided I didn't want to be a pharmacist. So I dropped out of school, and Mary we were already married at this point, and she was a secretary to some guy, a dentist, I think it was. And I was the assistant for a surveyor for the state. And I decided I didn't want to do that for 35 years. And so when I went and picked her up that afternoon, I said, "Guess what did I do? I joined the Navy." That's the first time she had ever heard about it. And I'll tell you, I learned a lot about marriage that day.
So that was your first stepping in it, so to speak, huh?
Big time. That's a story. That's a story that all three of my boys know.
So you've got 3 boys.
Yep, 3 boys, 3 beautiful daughter-in-laws, and 5 grandbabies.
Wonderful. What year did you get married?
In well, I have to do this subtraction. What is that? In 1980, I don't know.
Probably around that.
I know it's 53 years.
All righty. Well, we're not going to hold you to it because they say don't do math in public. So
That's
53 years. And then when did you go in the Navy?
75. I know that one.
All right. So 1975, you go into the Navy, and
I was at the very end of the Vietnam era, so I'm a Vietnam era veteran.
all right, but you didn't end up going to Vietnam then, right?
No. You know, I ended up in submarines, and they never put submarines boots on the ground.
Okay. So you end up in submarines. That's kind of a daunting cloak and dagger kind of an organization, and very secretive. And you get through basic training. Where do you go for tech school if you're going to be on a submarine?
Well, part of that answer is that I'm a nuclear power electrician. So I went to nuclear power school. Then I went to prototype. I stayed as an instructor for prototype. Then I went to an advanced electrician school, and they used to send nuclear power guys to submarine quals, and where you had to go through the tank and do the escape and all that. But they quit sending nukes to it because all they ended up doing was getting in trouble. And so I didn't go to that. And but then I went to our first sea duty was in Hawaii. I was the families were home based in Hawaii. The sub was home based in Guam, and it was a ballistic missile sub. And we were there 108 days at a time, and 92 days under the water. And then we would go back to Hawaii for R&R and additional training and that sort of thing.
So for the purpose of the audience understanding, there are 2 types of submarines, right?
There are 3 types now.
Tell us about the 3 types of submarines that the Navy has.
The Washington that I started on first is a ballistic missile submarine with the nuclear warheads. Then the second one I was on was they call fast attack, which was the skipjack. And then the third time now is the one with guided missiles on it.
So what are the key cool terms that the Navy uses for each of those submarines? It's SWIFT.
So SSBN is the ballistic missile, and SSN is the fast attack, and the SSGN is the guided missile cruiser.
And you end up on board these. Your wife and eventually the 3 boys are in Hawaii.
We had one son in Hawaii that was born at Army Tripler Hospital. And then, I'm sorry, that was not, the second one is born in Hawaii. The first one was born while I was an instructor at Prototype. And then the third one was born when I was in Groton.
Now, where's Groton?
Connecticut.
So you started as a West Coast sailor in Hawaii.
Right.
And then ended up on the East Coast. And you're originally from Louisiana.
My wife being an excellent military wife, she transferred 2 kids and our entire home from Hawaii to Florida while I was at sea.
So there's a lot to be said in that statement alone. There's a lot of understanding that takes place. There's a lot of patience that's going on.
All in her part.
You're gone through all of this. So you leave for sea duty, and then you come back not to the house that you left, but to a whole nother coast of the United States.
Well, I went back to Hawaii, picked up my orders for Orlando, and flew to Florida to find out where I was going to live then.
And had your wife already found the house and all of that?
You know, it was in base housing, and yes, we had found a place. By then, we had earned the right to have base housing. When I was first going to electrician school, we were not there long enough to be eligible for housing, so we lived in the Chicago ghetto.
Wow.
Yeah, that has its own experiences where we saw a guy shot across the street. We had a little 3-year-old curse us out, So it was that was interesting all by itself.
Wow, that's quite an experience. So, how many assignments did you have? I mean, you got all these deployments in the submarines, but you start in Hawaii and then you go to Orlando. And was that all of your? How many years did you serve?
Total was 30, but 12 years active and 18 reserve to make the 30.
So that 12 years, you start in Hawaii, you end up in Orlando.
I did 4 ballistic missile tours in Hawaii. And then we went to, as we moved, then I was an instructor, and then I went to Groton on the fast attack. And I did 2 tours or 2 deployments on the skipjack.
So you go out for 108 days at a time, correct?
On the ballistic missile. You
And
don't
then
know how long you're going to be going on a fast attack.
Oh, what was the longest amount of time that you were gone?
It was on the ballistic missile subs, and we were gone from home 108 days. We were under the water for 92 days.
And then when you're home, how long are you home before you have to go back?
About 2 months.
Is it 2 months where you have to show up and muster and all that sort of stuff, or is it go
Not every
home?
day, but yes, we have the first little bit of time off. We have to call in or report physically every 2 days at first, and then they put us back into training to prep us for going out again.
Okay, so there's some lead up time to stepping back into it. So you got to serve on all 3 types of submarines?
Just the 2.
Okay.
They didn't. The guided missile was not even a thing then when I was there. In fact, the George Washington Submarine Museum has been moved to Groton, Connecticut. And just as you walk through a concrete portal to enter the museum, and you're still outside, to the right is the sailplane of the George Washington. So I have pictures of standing beside the George Washington with one of my grandsons, because we took him to the museum.
So you do 12 years active. When you transition from active duty to the reserves, what rank or rate are you at that time?
Well, for me, I was very fortunate. I had, in 12 years, I had moved up and had been selected for E8, which is a senior chief in the Navy. And I was able to keep that rank in the reserves. Many times in the reserves, they'll knock you down a rank or whatever. But they allowed me to keep senior chief. And then as a senior chief, I was in a lot of different places over those years, besides going back to school and a lot of that sort of thing. I went to Mayport, where I was on a subtender. I was in La Maddalena, Italy, on a subtender. I was on the Master at Arms Force at the Space Center. That was kind of unique. And then I was on a subtender, on a dry dock in Kings Bay, Georgia, on 9/11.
Wow.
We had, I was there had come in early because there was a group of us that were coming in to do our reserve duty. And there were families on the pier with balloons and signs welcoming their sailors in, bringing this submarine in with the tank, with the tugs and everything. And all of a sudden, it all came to a halt. They turned the sub around and sent him back out. No waving at families, no nothing. Just turned them around and sent them back out. We heard later that they sent them up off the coast of New York in case they were needed over there.
Wow. Quite something. So you're in the reserves. As a reservist, were you an active reserve person, or did you have to find a job in the civilian world as well?
Eventually, it was in a job. But first off, I went to school. But I went back to, again, I was not sure what we were going to do. We knew we didn't want to stay in the military, because by being promoted rather quickly, every time I made rank, it was a new sea duty tour. And so we decided that's one of the big reasons that the boys would be grown by the time I quit making rank and quit going to sea. So when I got out, I decided to go back to school. But first I went to and was teaching at a Christian school, not making much money. It was below poverty level, and lived in a house that you could look through the eaves of the house and see outside. The gas company wouldn't turn on the gas. We had to use a hibachi. And that was before we finally decided to go to seminary. And that's a whole nother big experience story.
So it sounded like you went on a religious way forward. Did you become
Correct.
like a pastor of a church or something like that?
Well, yes, something like that. I never saw myself as every Sunday standing in a pulpit preaching. I was on the submarines. I was what they called a lay leader, and I had been trained by a chaplain to conduct services on the submarine while we were underway, because the submarine's too small to have its own chaplain. So they would train people, and I enjoyed that. And so I went into chaplaincy and started a number of years of training to be a chaplain and then to be an instructor of chaplaincy. And then I was blessed to become in charge of a chaplain service and retire. I finally retired as the National Associate Director of Chaplains for VA.
Wow.
Veteran.
So obviously you started earning some money, which
Yeah.
we
did
were able to move out of the see-through house and
yes,
and
yeah.
the gas out.
Well, and we moved out of that house to Hawaii, and we lived in actually the same housing that was there for World War II.
Wow. So now you retired as a Master Chief Petty Officer. Give us an inkling of what's life. Don't give us any operational stuff. Just tell us what's life like on a submarine when you're out there all that time. You know, in the movies, you have the imagery of stacks of food that submariners are, and is it submariner or submariner?
Well, that's a good conversation. In America, it's submariner. In England, it's submariner.
Alrighty. So you have the submarine and all the submariners are walking on the food, and
right?
Slowly it gets dissipated because you're consuming it all.
That's reality. Yes.
That's reality. What's a shift like? Do you have to hot cot? I mean, there's all these stories about life in the Navy.
All those things are reality. Yes. Our days are 18 hours long. The only person who has a 24-hour day is the captain. And the rest of us have an 18-hour day. We have 6 hours of watch, 6 hours of maintenance or training or whatever duties to be assigned, and then 6 hours of sleep, shower, wash clothes, eat, unless you decide to skip a 6 hour, and then you might watch a movie if it happens to be that time of the captain's 24-hour clock. So you never know when you before you go on shift for 6 hours, whether you'll be eating the meal that was prepared for his supper or for his breakfast or his midrats, and so there were 4 meals a day, and we worked on a three shift day.
A three shift day.
Six, and 6.
Oh, wow. Now, a captain being on a 24-hour shift, is that 24 on, 24 off, or does he just have to stay up for the entire 6 months?
Well, he can eat or sleep whenever he wants to. He's pretty much free to do whatever.
So he has to rely on very much.
But he's always on call. We had one incident where the Washington, not when I was aboard, it was the other crew. We had 2 crews, a blue and a gold crew. It was the other crew that came through a thermal layer as they were coming up closer to, you had to come up, at those days, you had to come up close to put out what they called a wire so that you could get signals from home to get messages. Now they have GPS and all kinds of good stuff. But when they broached through that thermal layer, they hit the underneath side of a ship and ripped the bottom out of it. And of course it sank, and the immediate response for a submarine is to go down, to go deep, to get away from it. But they didn't know if they had leaks or whatever else at that moment that you first start doing that.
Wow.
But when they came in, the front of the sailplane was all beat up. So the point of that was to say that the captain has to always be available, and he had actually nothing to do with that in that particular case, but he lost his job as a result of it.
Yeah, quite. It's a daunting challenge when you're in command. So those are quite the experiences that you've got. Obviously, you made the best of it. You did your 20 years and retired from the reserves. And then
30 years, but yes.
Oh, 30 years. So, okay, the maximum that one can do as at the pay grade of.
Yep, I requested an extension, but they said, no, you're done.
Okay. And
that was mostly because on the last deployment, reserve deployment, I had a heart attack. So it came back and I had to get medical waiver to continue to finish my 30. But then when I asked to stay longer, they said, no, you're done, Master Chief.
Health-wise, doing good?
Doing well. I'm 100% service connected now because of my heart. And I have a few other things. I've had a a few other things.
So on an academic standpoint, I understand that you recently completed your PhD. It's a doctorate.
They call it a doctor of ministry. It's sort of like a PhD, except it's more practical oriented than PhDs are for people who want to teach in seminaries, and doctor of ministry is to advance the practical end of ministry.
But you've taken that to a whole new level. I mean, you're the author of a book, and I think if we've got the name of the book is Moral Injury, and then there's a subtitle to that called Arming Pastors to Help Veterans Battle Soul Wounds Caused by Military Service. That's pretty enrapturing. Tell us a little bit about how moral injury applies from the book, applies to what you do now as a help to veterans. Like, are you involved in any veteran organizations as a chaplain yourself?
Quickly, my experience for that is I became a chaplain in the Veterans Administration and for many years ran PTSD groups in the VA. But nowadays, moral injury used to be underneath the diagnosis of PTSD, but now it's been separated out as it's having its own diagnosis as a religious and spiritual wound. But most of the writings were done by psychologists and social workers and that sort of thing, not really by any ministers. But my opinion is it's a spiritual wound, it's a soul wound, and needs to be addressed by spiritual leaders. And so that's what the book is about, how to encourage pastors to reclaim the care that they traditionally provided to folks going through spiritual crisis, to help folks from their arena, which is is the type of help that these with moral injury, what they really need.
So is moral injury, is that something that the VA recognizes as taking into consideration one's levels of disability?
No.
Okay.
You would still be diagnosed with PTSD in VA. Although most of the psychologists support the idea of doing what you're asking, it has, the way the government works, it hasn't happened yet. It was kind of like, how long did it take PTSD to be recognized, when it became battle fatigue and all the other things before it became a real thing. And I think the same thing is going to happen to moral injury, that it will move into the civilian community as time goes on, because moral injury occurs with police officers who end up having to shoot somebody when they're supposed to be there to serve and protect, or when a fireman has to go find a charred baby in a fire, or, all kinds of situations occur. And so, moral injury, I believe, will move to into the civilian community as time goes on.
As we always say here on Veterans Corner Radio, our veterans are worth their value in gold. Today, we've been speaking with retired United States Navy Master Chief Petty Officer and Dr. James Taylor, author of Moral Injury. And you're James Taylor, the doctor and U.S. Navy Master Chief Petty Officer, not the musician. We always need to point that out. Sir, thank you for all of what you're doing for our veterans and for all of your service and what you've done, and for the great family and that tough wife that you have beside you. And thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you again.
This has been today's episode of Veterans Corner Radio with Joe Mulder. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Veterans Corner Radio with your host, retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Joe Mulberger. The views expressed on this program are those of Joe and his guests, and our opinions based on the best available information. In matters of law or governmental regulation, it will always be best to check with the appropriate agency. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us for the next program on Veterans Corner Radio.
Here's a quick final thought. If you're enjoying these podcasts, why not take a minute to subscribe or mark Veterans Corner Radio as a favorite? It's easy, and you'll be set to be among the first to find out when new podcasts are published. And thanks again for listening to Veterans Corner Radio.